Hello there. Welcome to Noon Prayer Watch. It's Friday. The weekend is here. Shabbat Shalom. Hope y'all had a good week and hopefully an even better weekend coming up. Here, this is Jacob coming to you from Japan. Thank you for tuning in or catching up on the replay. As always, we very much appreciate you all standing with us, praying with us, learning with us, interceding, fighting with us. This is New Prayer Watch. We are here on the wall, watching, praying, discussing what is happening in our communities, our cities, nations, and planet, or like last week, what happened in the past. And today, we're going to be doing a little bit of both. We're going to talk about stuff that's happening right now, as well as things that happened or almost happened in ancient times. Now, before we get into today's topic, want to mention very briefly, there has been a deal signed between America and Iran regarding the war. The war seems to have stopped. I haven't actually read the details yet because it seems like there's other negotiations going on in terms of nuclear capabilities and all that sort of stuff. But a lot of people do not seem to be happy with the agreement. I'm sure on this channel, with CCS and Pipeline, my brother Zach and also Pastor Tim will be addressing this. You might even see some stuff being addressed on Sunday regarding this deal. I'm not going to get too into it that much because I still feel like there's some stuff to be resolved with all of that. But a lot of people do not seem to be happy. President Trump has been criticized a lot because over the years, he once said that Iran never won a war, but they never lost a negotiation. And it seems like they kind of won in the end. Not won, but they got a lot of their demands, and America didn't achieve their full objectives, which I think was regime change. And there's some controversy, there's some conspiracies about that, about how a regime change would have been brought about, but people were interfering and all that sort of stuff. I'm not really sure what the truth is there because it's all, rumors and things like that. But it's okay no matter what happens. God is in control. He has a plan, and that's kind of the topic of today's video, today's broadcast. God has a plan, and he tells men what to do, what not to do, and we try to do it. Sometimes we don't because we can't. There's something stopping us, or we're afraid, or there's so many different reasons. Things get in the way, enemies rise up, all that sort of stuff. But in the end, his plan will become reality, and that will happen with Iran. That's what I believe. So I'm not like, I feel like a lot of people are just discouraged about this deal with Iran, and but I'm telling you, I'm trying to give you hope. Don't be discouraged. There's more going on than what we see on the news. There's stuff going on in the spirit, and that's what we need to focus on, because that's ultimately where the real stuff's actually happening, in the spirit world, in the supernatural world. So, on the subject of the last couple of weeks, I've been talking about the gravity of the Lord, the gravity of God. He has his ways, and he pulls humanity towards them, whether we want to or not, whether we fight against him or whether we cooperate with him. He pulls humanity towards his purposes and his desires, his plan, his will. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to go back in time and look at God's plan in the past, and then come back to today and see what's happening with all of that. So today's topic is actually, we're going to be talking about something interesting in the Bible, the tribe of Dan. If you know the 12 tribes, one of them is called Dan, or Dan, if you want to say the original pronunciation. And the destiny of the tribe of Dan is really interesting. One thing I have found, and I've been blessed to have traveled to quite a few different nations, and one thing I found is in certain places in Europe, a lot of people, Christians, they talk about the lost tribes. They've been scattered into the world, and some people believe they're, descendants of this tribe, they're descendants of that tribe. I don't really know if that's true or not, but a lot of rumors, a lot of legends exist. One of them, some of you guys out there maybe have been to Ireland recently, and in Ireland's mythology, there's a character with Dan in the name, and so I've heard some people think maybe the Irish are a lost tribe, the Gaelic people are a lost tribe of Israel. That would be pretty interesting if that were true, but I don't know if it is. There's other places like Sweden has the D-E-N at the end. Denmark, they think maybe they went on boats and went up there. And the reason they say that is because there is a scripture in the book of Judges talking about the tribe of Dan and their boats, which we'll look at in a minute. And so they were seafaring people and they migrated, and now, they settled in all these different other areas in Northern Europe. I don't know if that's true or not. Maybe it is. It would be interesting if it is, but even if it isn't, the tribe of Dan is still very interesting in terms of how God's plan is carried out or not carried out, and yet it still becomes reality in the long run. Things are happening even right now. And so if you go to Israel, which Christian Center we haven't gone in a while because lots of things have been happening lately, wars and diseases and all that sort of stuff. Normally, this ministry takes a trip every year or so, and we haven't been able to do that lately. But one of the things that you will learn is you will go into the north of the country, and there is a place called the Dan Reserve. There's a lot of cool stuff up there, a lot of cool nature, but also it's an area with a lot of significant biblical events. If you read your Bibles, especially in the Kings, in 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, after Saul, David, and Solomon, and the nation split up. A lot of interesting things happened there. A lot of historical events that you read about. You get to go there and see, even during the time of Jesus, you go up in the north, some really significant stories happen in this area. It's north of where Capernaum is, where Galilee is. That's where Jesus kind of hung out most of his life. We go further north towards Lebanon. That's where the Dan Reserve is. And if you go there, we go to these places, we learn about them. And one of the most fascinating things I found out going there, the tour guide, we always usually have a guide explaining things. And he said that one of our guides said one time that the land where the tribe of Dan settled was not actually the place where God wanted them to be. They were supposed to be on the coast, on the ocean, and they weren't able to do that for a variety of reasons, which we'll talk about in a minute. And so they went up north into the hills, into the mountains, and settled there. And so I think it's interesting because today there's a very big city there that's very significant, not just in the modern state of Israel, but in world geopolitics and things like that. So let's get into it today. If you're watching on screen, I have this isn't really that big of a deal. But last week when I was talking, I talked about an event that happened in Japanese history. And another story came out, very small story, it's not super important, but it came out and there was a lot of drama and a lot of controversy over it. And I wanted to talk about it because I felt it fit, but I already had what I had lined up last week planned. So I just went ahead and went with that. Decided I'm going to talk about this week. If you know the actress, modern actress, her name is Gwyneth Paltrow. She was a Hollywood star, and she is now a lifestyle guru. She does sell some really suspicious things, but she is advertising lately. If you don't know who she is, by the way, I don't know what movie to say if you like to watch movies. The Marvel superhero movies, she was in the Iron Man movies. She's an actor with a Jewish background, if not completely Jewish. I don't know her actual background, but she is advertising, the face of an advertisement campaign for a luxury apartment complex in Herzliya, which is north of Tel Aviv, which is the financial hub of Israel, not the capital. Capital is Jerusalem, despite what a lot of people say out there. But Tel Aviv is where it's the more modern, affluent, liberal area. And I mean that more so in the cultural sense, political too for sure, but in the cultural sense. And so like a lot of famous people, celebrities like to go to Tel Aviv and hang out because it's a modern city. And so she is advertising it. It's on the Mediterranean coastline. It's about 10 miles north of Tel Aviv. And I'm not going to show you all of, like, if I show you the comments, the first comment, she's off my Christmas list, read the room, and showing destruction. And all of the comments are negative. And a lot of people were also bringing up, and what happens is people will lie They will make stuff up, or they don't know, a lot of ignorance going on out there. And they will say she, advertising this stuff on stolen Palestinian land. And there's a lot of controversy over, of course, the Israel-Palestine conflict, but that particular claim is very interesting because anybody who just knows the last 120 years of history, you're going to know that this land is not stolen at all because no one really lived there. Where Tel Aviv is, where I'll show you a map if you're looking on the screen here. Here is a map. Here's Israel. There's Israel. Tel Aviv is on the coast. Jerusalem, if you don't know, it's here. Deep into the country, closer to the Dead Sea than to the coast. And there's Tel Aviv Yafo, or Jaffa. And Jaffa is here on the south. Tel Aviv was built along the north. Herzliya somewhere in here. I've only been to Herzliya one time because we stayed at a hotel there. Actually, right here, up here somewhere. The last time I went there, actually, I stayed there the first night. Yeah, there it is, Herzliya. But you need to understand, until like 1909, which was a little more than 100 years ago, there was no significant urbanization. There might have been some farming areas, agricultural stuff going on, but there wasn't like a huge urban area for the entire history of humanity, even back into the time of the Israelites. And why is that? Why is that? Now, what's interesting is this land. I was talking about the tribe of Dan earlier. This is the area that God allotted for the tribe of Dan. But they never went here. They instead went up north, way up in this area, somewhere. So why is that? Why was this land never settled? Why did suddenly people start building things there in the early 1900s? And now it's this, big, massive city. Why is that? I think it's very significant. A lot of people don't know this, and so they make up a bunch of lies about, the Israelis stole it and all that sort of stuff. For one, a lot of the land that they started building on, it was legally bought from Arab villages nearby. But the reason for this is, the reason why it was never settled is, let me pull up some of my notes so I don't forget anything. There is a river there, and because there is a river here, it was very swampy. Lots of swamps in this area. This area also never was settled. It was very swampy. It was also hard to defend militarily. It's and historically, it's a wide open plain. So this was an area when the Israelites came to, the people there had better technology than they did. They had chariots, and it's a flat land, and the equipment that the Israelites had, in the Torah and Joshua, Judges, that area, it was inferior, and so they couldn't beat the people there, and they were driven up north. So it's harder to defend militarily historically. Jaffa, however, you'll read, in the Bible, you'll hear Jaffa mentioned. That's, for one place, that's where Peter was in Acts chapter 10 when he had his vision of the unclean animals that allowed him to go to talk to Cornelius, which is up here in Caesarea somewhere. Where's Caesarea? It's way up here. There it is, Caesarea, way up there. And he was in Jaffa. He was sleeping on a roof, I believe, if that's how the story goes. And so Jaffa is higher up. It's not swampy. It's in a rockier area. And so there's been an historical port urbanization area up here for thousands of years, but not north in this land up here. And so you have, of course, Jewish people came later, last century, started building it up. And now we have celebrities advertising places here, and people are saying this land is stolen, except it wasn't stolen because there's nothing to steal. No one lived there because it was basically uninhabitable. And the irony of all of this is that because malaria, we kind of forget about this when we learn about history, disease killed so many people. Like malaria was killing like 50% of humanity at certain points, if I'm not mistaken. It was incredibly devastating to the human populations worldwide. And we kind of, don't really think about that. It's kind of uncomfortable to think about, but we kind of don't think about that or consider that in historical context. And so the Israelis came with, their knowledge. They got rid of the swamps. They reduced the malaria threat, and that allowed people to live in this area. And ironically, before the Jewish people started coming to this land, the land of Canaan, the land of Israel that we know today, malaria actually prohibited or kept the Arab population. There were Arabs there too. There were Jews living there, but there were a lot of Arabs there. But they couldn't increase their numbers because malaria would kill so many of them. And it's ironic that the Jews came and they reduced this threat, and suddenly the Arab numbers started increasing. And of all the drama that goes on today, people don't realize that the people that are alive today are there because of the innovations and the contributions that the Jewish people came that started the modern state of Israel. Their numbers increased. And I just think that's really ironic, and a lot of people don't really appreciate that, of course, in what's going on in modern political discourse. But that's the modern situation. I want to talk about now what was God's original plan for this area of the Promised Land, his land that he gave to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What was his original plan? So there's a lot of scriptures I'm going to read through, so I'm not going to show them because there's a lot of them. But I do want to read through a lot of them very quickly because I think it's really interesting here. First and foremost, when we're talking about the tribe of Dan, when we're talking about the land that God has allotted the tribe of Dan, we first see in Numbers 33, verse 54, God and Moses are, giving instructions out. It says to distribute the land by lot according to your clans. To a larger group, give a larger inheritance. To a smaller group, give a smaller one. Whatever falls to them by lot will be theirs. Distribute it according to your ancestral tribes. So this is the plan that God had decided. This is how we're going to divvy up the Promised Land. And so then we see later, they're not in the land yet, but then they go in. And Joshua 19 talks about the lots being given. Joshua 19 verses 40 through 46. It says, the seventh lot came out for the tribe of Dan according to its clans. The territory for their inheritance, including Zorah, Eshtaol, a lot of the names of all of these different places. And the last part says, with the area facing Joppa or Jaffa, which is, on your screen right now. Jaffa. Joppa, all of these names, it's Hebrew, so it is transliterated into English in a lot of different ways, depending on who you ask. So this area is the area it was talking about, this area of Jaffa, Tel Aviv, all of this area. But what happened? Why did the people not settle there? It says later in Joshua 47, when the territory of the Danites was lost to them, they went up and fought against Leshem and took it to the sword occupation. So basically, we're missing some context here. And they'll say it in the next book of the Bible, but the Danites weren't able to settle this land. And so they went up north to where Leshem is, which is where the Dan Reserve is, where we know them to be historically. And then if you go to Judges chapter 1, it says the Amorites confined the Danites to the hill country, allowing them not to come down into the plain. So basically, Amorites were living here, and they, according to historical sources, they had better military tactics and equipment, chariots, and all that sort of stuff compared to the equipment that the Danites have, and so they couldn't take the land that was allotted to them. Remember, this was the plan in Numbers. God, decided this is how we're going to divvy up the land, but they weren't able to go along with what had been allotted to them, and so they just went up north, and that is where they lived. And then it summarizes everything at the end of Judges. It says they took what Micah had made and the priest. They went to Laish and against the people of the peace, and they attacked them with the sword, burned down their city, and rebuilt the city. And they named it Dan after their ancestor. That is originally where they ended up, way up in the north. So they weren't able to do it. They weren't able to take over this land. The Amorites stopped them. They went north. And it's hard to say, like, what could they have done? Did they not have enough faith? Were they not following the Lord? We can't really get into that right now. There's a lot of information we don't have access to in regards to that. But that was still God's plan for the people to go there. And if you read, there's another verse in Judges 5. It's somewhat unrelated to this, but is the Song of Deborah. Very beautiful chapter, Judges chapter 5. And in the Song of Deborah, she says, Gilead stayed beyond the Jordan, and Dan, why did he remain by the ships, by the ocean? Which is interesting because that's where they were supposed to be. But they weren't by the ocean. They were way up north. I think they might have tried to at one time, but they weren't able to stay there. And they eventually went up north and became a mountain-dwelling tribe. Their descendants did it, at least. So it's just really interesting. That was God's plan. His people weren't able to fulfill it, whether it's through lack of faith or disobedience or whatever. It doesn't really matter. They didn't do it. But what is happening today? Another thing that happened, I don't know, I can't say if this is really correct or connected, but the tour guide that originally told me this information way back in the day implied that where the Dan Reserve is, where Tel Dan is up in the north, where they originally settled, that is a source of a lot of idolatry there. They built a lot of idols throughout the times of the kings. Later on in that area, you can go there and see the historical remains of these temples that the rebellious kings of Israel built. And there's a lot of historical evidence and ruins there that you get to look at, and that's usually where you go if you take a trip up there. And the tour guide that I had basically implied that they were out of alignment of God's plan, and that staying out of alignment continued throughout the generations, and it was connected to the idolatry that they had. And you can go research all that history and make your own conclusions on whether that's true or not, but I just think it is really interesting. When we're out of alignment with God's plan in one area, that usually leads to other areas, whether it's directly connected or not. Regardless, they were not in where God wanted them to be for a variety of reasons. But all of that being said, we have to remember this idea. The gravity of God brings humanity, brings his people, whatever you want to call them, back to what his original plan was. And his original plan was for his people to settle this area. And so here is what is ironic. Thousands of years later, the Jews were scattered because, so the tribe of Dan settled in the north, and if you know the history of the Bible, the Amalekites, the Assyrians will come and they will defeat all of the northern tribes, the 10 tribes in the north, and they will take them into captivity and scatter them throughout the earth. And who knows how far they went. I personally believe the lost tribes went basically everywhere, to every corner of the earth. And that's my personal belief. But that was God's plan. And so they were there in the earth. Some of them stayed. Later, they went to Babylon, Persia, all that sort of stuff. After the time of the Romans, there was a rebellion, and a lot of them were taken to Europe. And so the Jewish diaspora went all over Europe, all over the Mediterranean, Spain, Northern Africa. Long story short, there was lots of abuse. There was World War II, of course, the biggest culmination of abuse of the Jewish people there. And that is when, it didn't start at that point, but throughout the 1800s and onwards, people were like, we cannot survive, or not survive, they can survive, but they cannot thrive, they cannot live in peace in different parts of the world. We need our own homeland. And so that's when the project to make a homeland in the land of Israel was created. It was called Palestine, not connected to what's called Palestine today. And it was ironic as a lot of the people back then wanted to keep using that name, but in the end, they used Israel. I still see people argue that they should have kept the name. That would have avoided a lot of the confusion that people have connecting, the British mandate of Palestine and what the Palestine movement that started in the 1960s is today. I don't know if that's true. I think there is something significant about calling it what God originally called this area. I think that's really important, even though it allows the enemy to lie and be deceitful when we talk about the issue today. But God brought all of them back. I mean, there are lots of scriptures about that, about him bringing his people back to the land, which is a cyclical prophecy. It's going to keep happening. It doesn't just happen one time, but it keeps happening over and over again. That's how really prophecy works in scripture. It's not just a one-time thing. But it's ironic because the reason that the tribe of Dan were not able to take this land back in the time of the Bible is now the reason why the Israelis are able to hold it today. Back in the day, the Amorites and the other peoples in this area were stronger than them militarily. And also the environment, the swampy area, everything, the dirt, the land wasn't really good for farming or living. That's why no one lived there for thousands of years until recently. Now, because the Jews went out into the world, they became smart and they became wise. They came back and they were able to deal with these two issues. And now Israel has a very advanced military. They are able to hold this land and defend it with their military technology, which is superior to their enemies. And of course, they have the science, the capability, the technology to tame the environment. They eliminated the swamps. They made this land habitable. And because of that, they were able to live there. They were able to hold it. They were able to thrive there. I just think that's very interesting. And that was in my opinion, 1,000-year, detour for God's plan to actually happen. He has a plan, and it takes time. It spans century, even it spans, a millennium. And we, especially in the modern time, we want things to happen right now, especially as Americans. We want everything, what we want it to happen right now. And we get frustrated when things don't happen, and we get cynical, and we just give up and say, maybe this isn't, going to work out. This isn't God's plan. And I think going back to Iran, the Iran situation, that's kind of what happened. President Trump had some objectives, and maybe he didn't completely accomplish all of them, and decided to cut his losses, but cut his losses and move on. A lot of things are happening right now. There's the World Cup. There's America's 250th anniversary. And I think that our American administration didn't want that, the Iran situation to distract from what's going on in America. President Trump has always been critical of military action in the Middle East. And he's not going to, despite what I think a lot of people were expecting, he's not going to I never thought he would put boots on the ground. He would send foot soldiers into Iran. That would just be a nightmare, especially considering the last 2 decades he's been criticizing America for, actions in Afghanistan and Iraq and all that sort of stuff. He's always been more surgical, doing stuff with, airstrikes and naval strikes and things like that. I've never known him to be one to actually send like a big large group, and that would become an absolute quagmire, and it would be very unpopular. And so I think he realized the situation and he pulled out. And we'll see what happens in the future. But we have to remember that God has a plan. He's thinking in centuries. He's thinking in millennia. And you have to understand that a lot of the people in the area of the Middle East think that way too. They're not, if their group doesn't win something right now, they're going to try again in 10 years, 20 years, 100 years or whatever, because they're thinking long term. Because this is a mindset. This mindset that I'm talking about comes from this land. It comes from the Jewish people that are from this land, they're thinking long terms. And we Christians from different areas, we have to align the way we think with what is in this book, because it holds us back. We will do something, but we give up too easily. And I'm not saying that we should prosecute the war in Iran for 10, 20 years like we did in Afghanistan. I'm not making that declaration. But if you're going to accomplish something, you have to realize that it might take a lot of time. And if you're not willing to commit to that, then maybe we don't start something that we can't finish. So we'll see. We'll keep praying, and we're not sure of. I do think that some gains have been made. A lot of evil men were destroyed and lost power and lost influence in the world. Iran's capabilities were definitely crippled in this conflict. Will that lead to longer term stability? I hope so, and I pray so, but we'll see. Regardless of what happens, God has a plan for Israel, of course, but he has a plan for Persia. He has a plan for the land of Iran and the people there. And I hope to see their situation improve, especially religious freedom and things like that. There's a lot of oppression and a lot of evil things happening that the government is doing to their people. And I pray that we see that one day. I pray that the church can rise up and flourish and become a significant force of change in that nation. That's what I'm praying for. But even if it doesn't, I have the assurance that one day that nation will align with the will of our wonderful God. And so I'm not going to be discouraged, because we have examples in our scriptures. We have evidence of things happening in the land of Israel today that are fulfillment of these things that God had originally planned out, like with the tribe of Dan. And I know that with Iran and with other nations in the area, it's going to happen as well, because I believe in our God. I know you guys do too. So anyway, that is all I have for you today. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, comment, hit the notification bell. It's a small way you can help support our ministry. If you'd like to donate to us financially, you can do so on the CCS app in your respective app stores. Be blessed. Thank you for watching today. Have a great weekend. Remember to always bring order to chaos. I will see you next time. Goodbye.